It's shocking, the number of times I've read about people getting hurt, or even killed, during animal encounters. It often seems to come down to a lack of awareness, a failure to respect the raw power of the natural world. I find myself wondering, why didn't they see the danger? Why weren't they better prepared? Today, I want to share a story that really stuck with me. A terrifying incident from a palm tree farm in Indonesia. It's a reminder that even seemingly quiet remote places can hold deadly secrets. It was July 21st, 2016, near Palangkaraya. The morning began quiet, heavy with humidity after the previous night's rain. But by evening, something horrific would unfold, something that would stun everyone who worked there. Reggie Peters, a 32-year-old farm advisor from Britain, was known as a quiet, diligent man. He'd been in Indonesia for 4 months, fascinated by the local wildlife, always taking photos of the bugs, birds, and animals he encountered. He was particularly unafraid of snakes and lizards, often kneeling to observe them closely, much to the concern of the other workers. On that day, Reggie set out to inspect the water ditches, critical for the upcoming rainy season. He carried his notebook, measuring tape, and phone, ready to record his observations. Around noon, 2 workers, Amir and Luthi, spotted him near a muddy ditch, writing in his notebook. They joked about the large snakes rumoured to inhabit the water channels. Reggie laughed, saying he'd love to see one up close. The workers later recalled that he seemed dismissive of their warnings, as if he thought their fears were just old wives' tales. The palm farm was vast, a grid of palm trees intersected by narrow water channels. The ground was soft and muddy from the recent rain, making it treacherous in places. Dragonflies flitted over the water, and mosquitoes filled the air. The only sounds were the distant buzz of chainsaws and the low croaking of frogs from the ditches. The heat hung heavy in the air. Reticulated pythons, some of the largest snakes on Earth, called this area home. They could grow to over 20 feet long and weigh more than 200 pounds. These snakes were ambush predators, lying in wait near the water for animals like pigs or dogs. Occasionally, though rarely in this specific region of Indonesia, they would even attack people. Sadly, their natural habitats were shrinking, driving them closer to human activity. The local people knew to be wary and often carried long knives for protection when working near the water. By late afternoon, Reggie hadn't returned to camp. Amir grew concerned and went to the last place he'd seen him. The farm was eerily silent except for the constant drone of insects. That's when Amir froze. One of Reggie's boots was stuck in the mud near the water channel, and just a few feet away, an enormous python lay coiled. The snake's midsection was grotesquely swollen, as if it had consumed a very large animal. Amir stood motionless, then began shouting for Luffy and the other workers. Within minutes, 5 men stood there, staring at the snake as it slowly began to move toward the bushes. The swollen bulge dragged heavily on the ground, leaving a deep track in the bud. The workers grabbed sticks and long poles, trying to poke at the snake from a safe distance. The python hissed loudly, opening its mouth wide to reveal its curved teeth. It coiled defensively. The snake was massive, about 15 feet long. None of the workers dared to approach it. The farm supervisor arrived and immediately called the local police. While they waited, the men kept a close watch on the snake. At one point, the swollen belly seemed to shift slightly, as if something inside was moving. There's a video I can't forget. It showed the inside of a massive python's belly. Mud and fluids mixed together, and there, curled up in a layer of slime, was a man named Reggie. His clothes were torn, his body lifeless. The men who found the snake had been looking for him. He'd gone missing near the water channels of the farm where he worked. One of them noticed an unnatural bulge in the snake's skin, far too large to be any normal animal. They killed the python, and the horror they discovered is something I've often thought about since. Reggie's notebook and phone, damaged by moisture, were found near the water's edge. He was placed in a sealed coffin and flown back home. The farm put up warning signs, a stark reminder not to travel alone. But the world keeps turning, and tragedy can strike anywhere. It was March 15th, 2014, in Ranthambore National Park, India. The air was cool after a hot day. 2 travellers were sleeping in a tent, unaware that a snake had quietly slithered inside. I've always found it unsettling how easily a single moment can a life, how quickly a normal day can turn into a tragedy. It's a stark reminder of the wildness that still exists, even in places we think we know. I think of Clare, a seasoned traveller in Australia who paid the ultimate price for a moment's oversight. Later that day, after Clare's death, the Australian embassy contacted her parents in Germany. Following local customs, they requested that her body be cremated. The camp management, understandably shaken, decided to continue their business. However, they hired a local snake expert to give weekly talks to new guests. These talks covered essential safety measures, such as how to properly check tents, and the importance of keeping lights on at night to deter snakes. Lara, another traveller who had been staying at the camp, eventually returned to Germany. She wrote a detailed account of the incident on a travel website. Her story served as a warning to other backpackers, urging them to always check their tents, bedding and shoes when in snake-prone areas. For years, this post circulated quietly, a grim reminder to those who romanticized sleeping close to nature without fully appreciating the dangers. Clare's tragedy underscores the critical importance of taking safety precautions seriously when venturing into wilderness areas. Even experienced and cautious travelers can face unexpected dangers when humans and wild animals share the same space. It's a stark reminder that proper preparation and awareness can be life-saving when traveling in remote natural areas. On September 9th, 2015, in a small lime orchard outside a rural town near Veracruz, Mexico, Jorge Cruz, a 42-year-old man who had worked in the orchard his entire life, began his day as he always did. He would rise before sunrise to check the water systems, prune the trees, and teach his oldest son how to assess the health of the fruit. In the village, Jorge was known as a reliable neighbor, the kind of person who would mend broken carts or lend tools without expecting anything in return. From childhood, Jorge had a habit of working barefoot, claiming it helped him feel the ground and move faster when climbing the lower branches. The afternoon was intensely hot, the air thick and still. The sun beat down relentlessly on the leaves. This orchard had been in his family for generations, but on this day, their normal routine was about to be shattered. Jorge was working alongside 2 neighbors, Raul and Mateo, picking limes on the far side of the grove. Workers had recently cleared the area, leaving a pile of cut tree branches. The three men joked about the heat as they moved among the lower branches, filling bags with limes. Jorge, wearing his wide hat pushed back and an old faded shirt, reached for a low branch, shifting his weight to pull the fruit closer. The ground was hard dirt, covered with fallen leaves and thin roots. The pile of cut branches provided cool shade for mice, rats, and small reptiles. Wild plants marked the orchard's edge, and the low treetops cast long, shifting shadows. The quiet was punctuated by small sounds, fruit falling, clothes rustling against bark. The men were focused on their work and conversation, perhaps not fully aware of the potential dangers around them. A highly venomous snake, Bothrops asper, known locally as the terciopelo or nauyaka, inhabits Central America. These snakes, thick-bodied and typically 3 to 5 feet long, possess a potent venom that destroys tissue and muscle, causes severe bleeding at the bite site, and can disrupt blood clotting and blood pres. Their camouflage is so effective, they often remain motionless among fallen leaves until someone is nearly upon them. Their bite typically causes excruciating pain and rapid swelling. That morning, the neighbors had discussed the increased snake sightings due to recent rains. Jorge's wife had even cautioned him to wear boots while clearing brush. The pile of cut branches, exactly the kind of place where snakes like to hide, was just a temporary heap of trimmings. Raúl later recalled warning Jorge to be careful, but Jorge dismissed their concerns, saying he would work quickly. As Jorge shifted his position, the snake struck with terrifying speed. It emerged from the leaves and bit him just above the ankle. Raúl and Mateo heard a sharp cry of pain as Jorge recoiled, grabbing at the wound. Before they could react, the snake bit him a second time. Dark blood stained the dirt where his foot had been. The pain was immediate and intense. Jorge doubled over, dropping the fruit. Within minutes, his lower leg began to swell, the skin becoming bruised and discolored. He began vomiting and sweating profusely, his face turning pale. Raúl quickly tied a piece of cloth above the bite marks, and they fashioned a splint from a broom handle to immobilize Jorge's leg. A neighbor brought a small wooden cart, and they lifted Jorge into it, pushing it toward the dirt road leading back to the village. The journey to the clinic was slow and bumpy. Dust coated Jorge's damp skin, and he became confused. His speech fragmented as he drifted in and out of consciousness. At the small village clinic, a nurse examined his swollen leg, noting his weak pulse and low blood press. The clinic had basic medical supplies, but lacked antivenom, the specialized medicine required to treat snake bites. The staff radioed the regional health center, requesting assistance, but the nearest supply of antivenom and a properly equipped ambulance were hours away. Jorge's condition deteriorated. He grew increasingly disoriented, his breathing becoming shallow. The medical staff was unable to improve his condition. By evening, despite their best efforts to stop the bleeding and assist his breathing, Jorge had died at the clinic. Raúl later said they tried to kill the snake, but it disappeared into the thick plants. I keep thinking about the wide-brimmed hat. After a man named Jorge died from ant bites, his wife began wearing his hat during harvest. A visible reminder, they said. The lime trees kept producing fruit, but each harvest now began with a serious reminder to be careful. It's a small thing, a hat, but it speaks to how quickly life can change, how easily a familiar landscape can turn dangerous. It was May 2nd, 2018. The air hung heavy over the Cross River. I imagined that feeling, that stillness before something breaks. Mina Belogan, just 19, had returned from university a week before. She loved the river, spent her afternoons there, swimming with her cousins. The elders warned them about snakes, more active during the dry season. But Mina dismissed their concerns. She thought the shallow water was safe. That day, she convinced 4 of her cousins to join her. They left their sandals on the rocks, walked into the cool water. Mina dreamed of starting a community project, teaching children to swim safely. She saw the river as full of life, not danger. Her cousins trusted her, followed her without worry. The river's surface was calm, reflecting the cloudless sky. But the locals knew the water was never truly quiet. Something was always moving underneath. They chose a wide, shallow part of the river with muddy banks. Dragonflies skimmed the surface. Thick plants cast long shadows over the deeper water. I know that African rock pythons, the continent's largest snakes, can grow over 20 feet long. They lie still, waiting for prey, then strike with powerful jaws, constricting until their victim can't breathe. They rarely attack people, but they're known to take goats, dogs, even antelopes. During the dry season, they hunt near dwindling water sources. Earlier that week, a fisherman had warned Mina's uncle about a large python sunning itself on a log nearby. The children were told to stay out of the water until the rains came, raising the water levels. But Mina insisted the shallow bend was safe. She'd been in the water for almost an hour when one of her cousins saw something long and dark moving toward them. At first, they thought it was a branch, but it curved, moved silently across the surface. Fear spread. The shape moved quickly, revealing the patterned body of an enormous python. It attacked with shocking speed. Jaws locked onto Mina's side, its body wrapping around her. Her cousins screamed as the coils tightened, forcing the air from her lungs. The water became violent, choppy. Mina fought, then went still as the python dragged her into deeper water. The children ran back to the village, screaming for help. It took the men several minutes to grab their knives and reach the river. The snake was still moving, pulling Mina deeper. The men went in, slashing at the python until it finally released her. They pulled her onto the muddy bank. She'd been underwater for minutes. Her skin was cold, pale, her lips a deep blue. The villagers tried pressing on her chest, blowing air into her mouth. Water mixed with mud came out of her mouth and nose. Someone recorded the desperate scene. Shouts, rushing water, the sound of knives hitting the snake. They tried for minutes, but there was no sign of life. Mina's body was placed on a mat near the water. The villagers gathered in silence. For weeks, the river bend remained empty. Fishermen refused to cast their nets there, calling it cursed. The village learned that even familiar places can hide unexpected dangers, especially when wild animals seek water and food. Mina's dream of teaching children to swim safely took on new meaning as the community worked to prevent similar tragedies. It was June 10, 2013, in Sweetwater, Texas. The fairground was sweltering. Heat rose off the tarps and metal bleachers, turning a routine demonstration into a day where small mistakes would have serious consequences. A man named Samuel "Sammy" Price, 38 years old, had been a volunteer snake handler at the annual rattlesnake roundup since he was a child. He was respected in town. I've seen how quickly things can turn, how easily a moment of calm can become a tragedy. Sometimes experience isn't enough. Sometimes even the most skilled among us are vulnerable. I remember reading about a snake handler named Sammy, and his story has stayed with me. Sammy was a steady presence at the festival, someone with years of hands-on experience. He patiently taught new volunteers, preferring to show rather than just tell. Locals trusted him because he never rushed and gently corrected mistakes. But this year, the festival was more crowded, the schedule tighter. Sammy, moving between snake pits all morning, answering questions, had skipped breakfast and felt weary from the sun. His co-workers urged him to rest, but he kept working, seeing it as his responsibility. The roundup used shallow pits surrounded by temporary barriers, a raised platform, folding chairs. The air was thick with fried food, car exhaust, and dust. Shade cloths and water were nearby, but the layout was cramped, volunteers stuck in the sun. Spectators leaned against the fence, phones raised, recording every move. This setup, designed for clear viewing, reduced space for handlers and limited cooling. Western diamondback rattlesnakes, strong pit vipers 4 to 5 feet long, carry venom that causes tissue damage, bleeding, and shock. Large adults can strike surprisingly far. Under stress, a snake might twist unexpectedly, changing a handler's grip, exposing skin. Even skilled handlers can be bitten when a snake is already upset, or when heat and repeated handling increase stress. That day, organizers had warned volunteers to take turns, limit heavy handling during the hottest hours. A small morning accident had prompted a formal reminder to take breaks, drink water. Medical personnel stood by with IV fluids and anti-venom. Sammy heard, agreed, but the crowd and schedule drew him back. He took a heavy Western diamondback from a colleague, stepped into the pit with a leather glove and snake hook, and lifted the snake with practiced ease. For a moment, the crowd relaxed, calmed by Sammy's steady presence. Then the snake shifted, twisted sharply under stress, lunged, and its fangs pierced the soft tissue near Sammy's elbow. Pain shot up his arm. He signaled he was, but his face reddened, sweat beaded on his forehead. He kept talking to the crowd for several minutes, but his breathing grew shallow, and he asked for a chair. The bite area swelled rapidly, discoloration spreading down his forearm. Within minutes, the swelling reached his shoulder, his skin darkening with bruising as tissue damage progressed. Volunteers moved him to the first aid tent when he could no longer stand. Paramedics applied prez, started IV fluids, pushed anti-venom. His breathing turned shallow, his skin cold and blotched. Despite fast treatment, his blood press collapsed, his pulse faded. Witnesses recalled frantic attempts to keep him conscious as medics called for an airlift that never arrived in time. In the aftermath, friends and fellow handlers organized training sessions. inviting regional medics to review emergency procedures and practice drills. A younger relative began helping at the pits, learning to prioritize taking turns and staying hydrated over putting on a good show. The festival board documented the incident, creating a checklist for demonstrations, maximum handling time, required breaks, and a fast evacuation plan to the nearest ambulance access point. Sometimes, even the most experienced among us are vulnerable, and the consequences can be devastating. It serves as a stark reminder of the importance of safety, preparedness, and respecting the power of nature. It reminds me of another case I read about, this one involving a woman named Erica Winslow. It was March 15th, 2016, in the dense rainforests of southeastern Cameroon, where towering mahogany trees stretched endlessly under the humid canopy. Hidden among thick jungle vegetation near the Sangha River, a converted logging camp sat isolated on 50 acres of abandoned concession land. The property had once housed a legitimate primate research station under proper government permits, but those days were long gone. Erica Winslow, a 52-year-old former wildlife photographer from America, had been operating this facility illegally for 3 years after her research permits expired. What she refused to surrender was Caesar, an 18-year-old western lowland gorilla weighing 375 libs. Erica's demanding personality and entitled behavior had made her notorious among local officials and village chiefs. She constantly complained about wildlife inspections and refused to acknowledge that her research permits had expired. With no formal primate training, she relied entirely on YouTube videos and outdated zoo management methods she found online. Her social media posts showed increasingly erratic behavior as she attempted to discipline Caesar using intimidation tactics. The massive silverback had been displaying heightened territorial aggression for weeks, throwing branches at visitors and damaging the reinforced walls of his enclosure. Local villagers reported loud chest beating throughout the night, and Caesar had been refusing to enter his night shelter for the past 2 weeks, defying Erica's commands entirely. Cameroon's Ministry of Forestry and Wildlife had been building a case to seize the animals, but corruption and bureaucratic delays. The silverback sat calmly beside her lifeless body for the next 4 hours. Occasionally, he'd groom blood from his hands. I can only imagine what went through the minds of the local villagers when they discovered the scene the following morning, the usual sounds of morning feeding never coming. Erica's frustration, it seems, had reached its breaking point that evening. Caesar, the western lowland gorilla, sat defiantly in the center of his enclosure, ignoring her increasingly loud commands to enter his night quarters. She was determined to assert her dominance, and that decision would prove fatal. She grabbed a makeshift electric prod and unlocked the gate to his pen. As she stepped inside, wielding the device, Caesar's behavior shifted instantly from passive resistance to explosive aggression. The 375-pound silverback charged across the enclosure with terrifying speed. His massive body slammed into Erica's chest, launching her backward into the metal fence. The rusted metal cut deep into her back as Caesar's enormous hands grabbed her face, his thumbs pressing into her eye sockets. Blood streamed down her cheeks as his fingernails tore at her skin. Caesar's powerful jaws clamped down on her left ear, severing it completely. Erica's screams echoed across the empty rainforest as the gorilla grabbed her right hand, which still clutched the makeshift prod. His bite force crushed 3 fingers at the knuckles, severing them entirely. The enraged primate lifted Erica's body off the ground and shook her violently. Her shoulder dislocated as Caesar slammed her face first into the concrete floor. Her nose shattered on impact, creating a growing pool of blood beneath her head. The gorilla then grabbed her right leg with both massive hands and twisted with brutal force, snapping her femur bone. Caesar positioned himself over Erica's prone form and brought both fists down on her ribcage. 6 ribs cracked simultaneously, the broken bones puncturing both lungs. Her breathing became shallow and labored as blood filled her chest cavity. For his final attack, Caesar grabbed Erica's head between his massive palms and squeezed with methodical press. Her skull cracked like an eggshell, and brain matter leaked onto the concrete floor. Her body went completely limp as life left her. Cameroonian authorities launched an immediate investigation into the illegal operation, while wildlife officials worked to safely relocate Caesar to the Lima Wildlife Centre. The incident sparked renewed debate about foreign nationals operating illegal wildlife facilities and the dangers posed to both operators and local communities. Government agents seized all remaining animals from the property within days. Erica's family released a statement expressing their grief, while acknowledging the inherent dangers of keeping such powerful animals in captivity. It was July 22, 2017, along the pristine banks of Idaho's Salmon River. The remote wilderness area, known for its clear streams and abundant wildlife, had become the perfect destination for the Price family's annual camping adventure. Landon Price, a 34-year-old construction foreman, had driven his wife Sarah and their 2 young children to this secluded spot. What made this trip different was the modified dog crate secured in the back of their pickup truck, containing their most unusual family member. 2 years earlier, Landon had purchased Scout, a mountain cougar cub, from an exotic animal dealer. The construction worker's overconfident personality had convinced him that his experience with domestic animals would translate perfectly to raising a wild predator. He kept the growing cougar in a reinforced shed behind their suburban home, telling curious neighbors it was simply an unusually large dog breed. Sarah, an elementary school teacher, had grown increasingly uncomfortable with Scout's presence, especially after the children began complaining that the animal's eyes looked mean during feeding times. The warning signs had been mounting for weeks. Scout had killed 3 neighborhood cats in the past month, leaving their partially eaten remains scattered around the property. Just 2 weeks prior, the cougar had escaped from his enclosure and stalked the mail carrier for several blocks before Landon managed to recapture him. Local game wardens had received multiple reports of unusual animal sounds coming from the Price residence. But, bureaucratic Della, it's a tragic irony. Cougars, even those raised in captivity, never truly lose their wild instincts. In fact, those instincts can become even more pronounced in unfamiliar settings, where their sense of territory kicks into overdrive, I recall a case that illustrates this perfectly. Landon, a man who had raised a cougar named Scout, made a fatal misjudgment. He released Scout from her transport crate, thinking he was doing her a kindness by allowing her to stretch and explore the wilderness. He believed Scout was domesticated because of her upbringing. He treated the predator like an oversized house cat. As Landon's family set up their fishing gear, Scout emerged and immediately began surveying the new land. Her coat blended seamlessly with the brush as her yellow eyes scanned, cataloguing every detail. The 140-pound cougar's predatory instincts took over the moment Landon walked toward the river to fill water containers. Scout's pupils dilated. She crouched behind a log, muscles coiling. Her tail twitched, a telltale sign of a hunt about to begin. Then, in complete silence, she launched herself, covering 20 feet in a single leap, striking Landon squarely in the back. Her 4-inch claws sank deep into his shoulders, designed to prevent escape. The predator's jaws clamped down on the back of Landon's neck with surgical precision. Scout's canine teeth severed his spinal cord instantly. The bite caused immediate paralysis from the neck down. Landon drowned within 90 seconds. Scout maintained her grip, then dragged Landon's lifeless body toward the brush line. Sarah, Landon's wife, grabbed their children and rushed them to the safety of their locked truck. They waited there for 3 terrifying hours until park rangers arrived. Authorities launched an investigation into the illegal possession of the mountain cougar. This tragedy reignited debates about exotic animal ownership and the dangers these predators pose. Then there's the story of Marcus Ellison, which unfolded on September 8, 2015, on a sprawling ranch in South Texas. His remote 50-acre estate was miles from his nearest neighbor. The perfect isolation for his dangerous hobby, one might say. Marcus, a 41-year-old oil rig worker, had converted an old barn into a makeshift big cat facility. He shared the property with his girlfriend, Lisa Chen, a 28-year-old veterinary technician. Lisa had grown increasingly concerned about their unusual housemate, Luna, a jaguar. 4 years earlier, Marcus had purchased Luna as a 6-month-old cub from a black market dealer operating along the Texas-Mexico border. His desire to collect dangerous animals as status symbols led him to spend his oil rig earnings on exotic pets. Luna had grown into a powerful 180-pound predator, but Marcus believed their bond would protect him from any danger. Lisa had been pressuring him to surrender Luna to a sanctuary, especially after witnessing the jaguar's increasingly erratic behavior. The warning signs had been mounting. Luna had been refusing all food for 4 consecutive days, despite Marcus offering her favorite cuts of meat. She had begun territorial marking throughout the house. Her obsessive pacing had worn visible paths in her enclos, and her pupils remained constantly dilated, indicating severe psychological stress. Neighbors reported hearing strange vocalizations echoing across the countryside. Jaguars possess the strongest bite force of any feline species. Apex predators, they are perfectly designed killing machines. Unlike other big cats, jaguars deliver precise killing bites directly through the skull or spine. Even hand-raised jaguars retain all their wild instincts and can become unpredictably aggressive when stressed. Marcus made his fatal mistake when he entered Luna's enclos without backup or safety equipment. concerned about her food refusal. He believed their bond would allow him to safely investigate her condition. He unlocked the gate to her pen and stepped inside, carrying only a small flashlight. Luna sat motionless in the shadows, her yellow eyes reflecting the beam. The 180-pound jaguar had been waiting for this moment. As Marcus knelt 15 feet away and extended his hand in what he thought was a gesture of comfort, Luna's predatory instincts took complete control. Her muscles propelled her across the enclave in 2 swift bounds. Luna's attack was swift and devastatingly precise. Her massive body slammed into Marcus's chest. I've seen firsthand what happens when the line between wild and domestic blurs. I've walked those scenes. The story of Marcus, the man killed by the jaguar Luna, is a stark reminder. Luna, with the force of a battering ram, sent him crashing to the floor. Her jaws locked on his throat with surgical precision. The jaguar's bite, 1,500 pounds per square inch, crushed his windpipe. His arteries were severed. He lost consciousness in seconds. Luna held her grip for 3 minutes, ensuring her prey was subdued. Only then did she begin to feed. Lisa discovered the scene the next morning. Luna calmly grooming herself, Marcus's body partially consumed. A grim testament. The incident, as these things always do, sparked calls for stricter regulations on exotic animal ownership. Marcus's family even released a statement, acknowledging the dangers of keeping wild predators. Then there's the story of Brianna Ellis. June 14th, 2018, Homestead, Florida. Manicured lawns hid a backyard pond, 40 by 60 feet, an artificial home to a deadly predator. Brianna, a marine biology student, was studying reptilian behavior there. She shared the property with friends, Kevin, a photographer, and Amanda, a social media influencer. 2 years prior, Brianna had rescued Brutus, a 9-foot American alligator, from a failing roadside attraction. She believed she could safely study him while providing proper care. The landlord, of course, had no idea a 350-pound predator lived in his backyard. The warning signs were there. Brutus was increasingly aggressive during feeding, lunging at the edge of the pond. Neighbors complained of strange splashing sounds. Brutus floated motionless for hours, classic hunting behavior. American alligators are apex predators, virtually unchanged for millions of years. Adult males can reach 14 feet and 800 pounds, their jaws exerting nearly 3,000 pounds of pres per square inch. They can crush a bowling ball. Their death roll can dismember prey in seconds. Ambush hunters, capable of explosive speed. Brianna made her fatal mistake as the sun set. She dropped her pH testing equipment into the pond and decided to retrieve it herself. Kevin suggested a pool net, but Brianna insisted on entering the water. Dusk, of course, is the most active hunting period for alligators. As Brianna waded in, Brutus began his approach. The 350-pound alligator moved with incredible precision, creating no wake. Brianna bent down, focused on her task, unaware that Brutus was just 6 feet away. He remained motionless beneath the surface, preparing for his attack. It came with devastating force. Brutus launched himself upward, his jaws opening to reveal rows of teeth. His bite encompassed Brianna's entire right thigh, crushing her femur instantly. Brianna's screams pierced the evening air as Brutus began his death roll. The rotational force tore her leg away at the hip joint within seconds. The severed femoral artery released massive amounts of blood. Before she could escape, Brutus attacked again, clamping down on her torso, puncturing her rib cage. There are moments when the animal world reminds us of its untamed power, a power that can turn tragically on those who misunderstand it. I remember reading the details of a case in upstate New York. It involved a woman named Brianna, an alligator named Brutus, and a pond. The kind of details that stay with you long after you wish they hadn't. Brutus, the alligator, dragged Brianna toward the deeper section of the pond, holding her underwater with an almost unsettling determination. The thrashing continued for nearly 2 minutes as Brutus performed his instinctive drowning technique. Brianna's body went limp as her lungs filled. Emergency services were called, but the dive team only recovered scattered remains. Brutus retreated to the deepest section of the pond with his kill. The incident prompted immediate changes to local ordinances regarding exotic animal ownership in residential areas. It was October 3, 2016, in the remote wilderness of the Adirondack Mountains, 15 miles from the nearest neighbor. A weathered log cabin sat nestled among the dense forest. This isolated retreat had become home to Shah Gallagher, a 38-year-old former wildlife rehabilitator whose career had ended in disgrace 3 years earlier. The bitter and paranoid man had retreated to this inherited family property after losing his rehabilitation license following a previous bear incident that left him with a permanent limp. Sean shared his remote sanctuary with Kodiak, an 8-year-old American black bear weighing 400 pounds. He had illegally acquired the animal as an injured cub 3 years prior, claiming to rescue it from certain death in the wild. His obsession with proving his rehabilitation methods were superior to state-approved programs had driven him to keep Kodiak despite losing his professional credentials. The bear lived in a reinforced room within the cabin, a makeshift arrangement that had grown increasingly inadequate as Kodiak matured. Sean's journal entries from recent weeks revealed growing paranoia about the bear's intentions and his deteriorating mental state from years of isolation. The warning signs had been escalating dramatically over the past month. Kodiak had been systematically destroying the cabin's interior, tearing apart furniture, and clawing deep gouges in the wooden walls. The bear had become increasingly aggressive when Sean attempted to limit his food portions, displaying territorial behavior that should have served as a clear warning. Most concerning was Kodiak's obsessive testing of door and window strength, repeatedly pushing against barriers as if calculating escape routes. American black bears are deceptively powerful predators despite their smaller size compared to grizzlies. Adult males are capable of reaching speeds of 30 mph and possessing the strength to overturn boulders weighing several hundred pounds. Their powerful jaws can exert over 800 pounds of prise per square inch, easily capable of crushing human skulls, while their 4-inch claws are designed for climbing and digging, but prove devastatingly effective weapons. Black bears are naturally nocturnal creatures, most active during twilight and nighttime hours when their predatory instincts are heightened. Sean made his fatal mistake at 2:30 in the morning, when he decided to enter Kodiak's reinforced room to retrieve his damaged laptop and camera equipment. The bear appeared to be sleeping peacefully in the corner of the 15-20 foot space, his massive form barely visible in the darkness. Sean desperately needed to recover his electronics before they were completely destroyed by the bear's ongoing rampage. He stepped quietly into the room, carrying only a small flashlight, believing Kodiak was in deep sleep. What Sean failed to realize was that Kodiak had been awake for hours, waiting with the patience that made black bears such effective predators. The bear's naturally nocturnal behavior meant his senses were at peak alertness during these early morning hours, and captivity had made him increasingly territorial about his confined space. The 400-pound black bear moved with surprising speed and agility. Kodiak rose to his full height of 7 feet and charged across the room in 3 powerful strides. Sean had no time to react as the bear's enormous frame filled his vision. Kodiak's first strike came from his massive right paw, equipped with 4-inch claws designed by nature for climbing and digging. The blow struck Sean squarely in the chest with tremendous force, his claws raking 4 parallel gashes across his ribcage that penetrated deep into muscle and bone. The impact launched Sean backward into the reinforced wall with bone-crushing force. Before Sean could even attempt to defend himself, Kodiak pressed his attack with methodical efficiency. The bear's powerful jaws clamped down on Sean's head, encompassing his skull from temple to temple. Kodiak's bite force of 800 pounds per square inch crushed Sean's skull like an eggshell, causing immediate and catastrophic brain trauma. Brain matter leaked between the bear's teeth as he shook his massive head violently. Sean's body went completely limp within seconds, but Kodiak's defensive rage kept driving the assault. The bear mauled with relentless power, claws raking and jaws crushing bone, as if to eliminate a threat rather than feed. In his fury, Kodiak tore into Sean's torso, ribs splintering under the press, leaving a scene of raw devastation born not of hunger, but of instinctive dominance and fear. The attack continued for 15 minutes before Kodiak finally retreated to his corner, leaving Sean's partially consumed remains scattered across the wooden floor. The bear sat calmly, grooming blood from its claws and muzzle. Sean's body was discovered 3 days later, when concerned neighbors noticed smoke was no longer rising from the cabin's chimney. I've always been drawn to stories where humans attempt to bridge the gap between themselves and the wild. Sometimes that bridge collapses with tragic consequences. There was the case of Kodiak, the black bear illegally kept as a pet, and the scramble to relocate him to a sanctuary. But these stories often take a darker turn. It was March 22, 2015, near Houston, Texas. I can almost feel the heavy, humid air as I picture the scene. Michael Torres, a 41-year-old mechanic, lived a solitary life, finding solace in fixing old cars and caring for a collection of animals. It began innocently enough, with ball pythons and iguanas. But then he acquired Raja, a 6-year-old Bengal tiger, from a private breeder. He kept Raja in a large enclosure on his property, reinforced with steel and heavy wire. Neighbors would sometimes see Michael walking alongside the tiger, talking to it like a friend. He genuinely believed Raja recognized his scent and tone, that the animal would never hurt him. He told a friend it was all about trust, earning respect through calm handling, not fear. It's a sentiment I've heard echoed in other similar cases, that belief in a bond that transcends species. That afternoon was overcast and sticky, the air thick with the smell of straw and damp soil. A friend, Luis Alvarez, stopped by to borrow a tool and watched as Michael approached the cage. Raja was unusually restless, pacing back and forth, its tail twitching. Construction noise from a nearby property filled the air, and Michael believed the tiger was agitated by the noise. Bengal tigers, I must remind myself, are apex predators. Their bite can crush bone with over 1,000 lb of pres. Even those raised from cubs retain their hunting instincts. Male tigers can weigh over 400 lb and strike with enough force to shatter ribs. Their attacks are often sudden, triggered by movement. Luis stood about 20 yards away as Michael opened the inner gate to clean the enclos. He'd left the outer gate partially open for convenience, something he'd done before. As Michael worked, Luis noticed Raja's muscles tensing, its pace quickening. Michael glanced up, muttered something, and continued shoveling. Then Luis saw the tiger freeze. Its ears flattened, body crouched low, tail twitching rapidly. In a split second, Raja lunged. The impact was sickening, a hollow sound of metal and flesh. The tiger's paw raked across Michael's face, knocking him to the ground. He screamed, trying to crawl toward the gate. Raja was on him in 2 strides, clamping its jaws around his neck and shoulder, dragging him deeper into the enclos. Luis shouted, throwing a wrench that bounced harmlessly off the fencing. Michael swung the shovel, striking Raja's snout, but the tiger's grip only tightened. Luis grabbed gravel, hurling it and screaming, but Raja shook its head violently, slamming Michael's limp body against the ground. Michael's arm twitched once, then went still. Raja continued biting, dragging the body under a metal shelter. Luis ran for his truck and called 911. When deputies arrived, they waited for animal control. But when Raja charged the fencing, an officer fired his rifle, striking the tiger in the shoulder. Raja collapsed near the shelter. Michael's body was extensively mutilated, with massive lacerations to the neck, chest, and abdomen. One arm was partially severed, and his face was unrecognizable. Investigators noted the lack of a secondary containment system, no safety barrier or secondary lock. The open gate had given the tiger full access. Animal control removed Raja's body that night. Michael's funeral was small, attended by fewer than 20 people. Neighbours left flowers at the fence. The straw inside still stained dark where the attack happened. Another story, another experiment in control gone tragically wrong. This one unfolded on January the 14th, 2016, in Surabaya, Indonesia. The air hung heavy with humidity. The sounds of the city muted on the industrial edges of the port. Behind a row of warehouses, one lot stood apart, quiet, except for the occasional clank of metal and the faint scrape of claws against concrete. Within those walls, a private fascination was reaching its breaking point. Ahmad Firdos, a 34-year-old auto parts importer, was known for his patience and meticulous nature. But he also harbored a secret fascination with exotic animals. Years earlier, he had been captivated by the Komodo dragon during a trip to Flores. When an acquaintance offered him a hatchling, Ahmad accepted, paying in cash and keeping it hidden from his family. Over the next 2 years, the reptile grew from a curious pet into a formidable presence. I've seen the reports, of course. I've read the accounts. But it's hard to truly grasp the weight of such stories until you imagine yourself there, in that warehouse, the air thick with humidity and the metallic tang of blood. A man named Ahmad, who saw himself as a friend to a Komodo dragon, never realizing that to the animal he was always prey. Ahmad had raised the dragon from a hatchling, feeding it by hand. He had found it injured and alone. The dragon's pen wasn't quite right. It was small, built for a creature half its size. He fed it chicken and goat, proud that it seemed to trust him. Some of his employees warned him to be careful, that the animal wasn't tame. But Ahmad just smiled and said it knew him. That Thursday morning was overcast. Ahmad had missed feeding the dragon the night before. He noticed the water basin was overturned, filthy. He wanted to clean it before work began. The gate creaked as he entered the enclos. The dragon was still, motionless in the corner. Komodo dragons can grow to be 10 feet long, with a bite strong enough to crush bone. Their venom is full of anticoagulants and toxins that cause rapid blood loss and shock. They're ambush predators, fast despite their size. In captivity, they can become aggressive if they're handled too much or underfed. Yudi, another worker, heard a clang and a thud, then a sharp cry. He ran toward the back, rounding the corner just as Ahmad fell. The dragon had latched onto his calf, teeth deep in his leg. Blood spread on the concrete. Ahmad kicked, yelling for Yudi to get help. The dragon released, then lunged again, clamping down on Ahmad's forearm. Ahmad tried to pull away, but the animal twisted its head, tearing loose strips of muscle. Yudi grabbed a metal pole and swung, striking the dragon's side. It turned, mouth gaping, tongue flicking, tail whipping. Saliva dripped from its jaws. Ahmad crawled backward, leaving a smear of blood. The dragon lunged again, catching his side below the ribs, teeth sinking deep. Ahmad's scream turned into a rasp. Yudi struck again and again until the creature finally backed off. Ahmad slumped back, eyes open, hand pressed against the wound. The concrete was dark red. Yudi ran to the gate, grabbed a burlap sack, and waved it near the dragon's face. The animal lunged, and Yudi managed to pull the gate shut, locking it. He turned to Ahmad, who was still. The blood loss had been catastrophic. By the time emergency responders arrived, Ahmad was gone. Reports confirmed he had suffered multiple lacerations to his leg, arm, and abdomen, with severe internal bleeding. The cause of death was massive blood loss and traumatic shock from the venom. Veterinarians said the animal had shown signs of food aggression, triggered by sudden movements during feeding. Police contacted the Natural Resources Conservation Agency. The Komodo dragon, just under 7 feet long and weighing 140 pounds, was sedated and taken to a wildlife rehabilitation centre. Officials confirmed it had come from Rinka Island, obtained through illegal trade. The story was in the local papers for a day, then disappeared. Neighbours remembered Ahmad as generous, sponsoring football games and giving water to delivery drivers. But within the warehouse community, the story circulated quietly, a warning. Not far from there, in Montana, on May 30th, 2014, Another tragedy was brewing. The morning was still and clear. A line of spruce trees framed the animal sanctuary that Mark Jennings had built. One enclosure stood out, larger than the rest, its occupant pacing. By noon, that silence would be shattered. I've often wondered about the final thoughts that run through someone's mind in those last, desperate seconds. Investigators pieced together the sequence from a statement and evidence, but the attack lasted less than half a minute. Aaron dragged herself backward, leaving red streaks, until she collapsed near the outer fence. All she could hear was Mark shouting, "Stop!" and then only heavy breathing. That sanctuary sat on rolling pasture, bordered by pines. Early summer meant strong sunlight and restless animals. I can almost smell it, the air carrying hay and meat from the storage shed. That morning, the enclosures were quiet, except for pacing claws and creaking metal gates. Aaron arrived early to prepare Bruno's meal. 15 pounds of meat mixed with supplements. Mark had left the previous evening to visit his sister. He reminded Aaron to feed Bruno at the usual time, late morning, and check the water trough. The next day, he texted her around 10, receiving no reply. He assumed she was busy, then began his drive back. When he pulled into the gravel lot just after noon, he noticed the outer gate to the bear enclosure half open. The feeding pail lay overturned beside it. Seconds later, he heard screaming. He ran toward the sound, rounding the corner to see Bruno towering near the feeding platform. Aaron was on the ground beneath him, her right arm torn open. She kicked weakly, her clothes soaked dark with blood. The bear's movements were methodical, broad swipes, a deep huffing sound between each motion. Mark froze for a moment, then shouted Bruno's name and ran for a rake. The noise drew Bruno's attention immediately. He turned, fur bristling, and lunged. The impact knocked Mark flat. Bruno's paw struck his chest again, the claws sinking deep. Aaron saw Mark roll, trying to crawl back toward the gate, but the bear dropped onto him, pressing its full weight down. Bruno bit into Mark's left shoulder, shaking violently, then adjusted his grip, jaws closing on his neck. Deputies arrived minutes later, responding to a 911 call. They found Bruno standing over Mark's body, huffing and lowering his head as they approached. When an officer fired a warning shot, the bear reared back, roaring. The second volley hit him directly in the chest and shoulder. Bruno staggered, exhaled sharply. The medical report confirmed that Mark had died from blunt and penetrating trauma to the thorax and cervical region. Aaron survived after multiple surgeries. Investigators determined that the feeding gate had been improperly secured, allowing Bruno to push through before the pail was placed. Food aggression was cited as the cause, a sudden response to perceived competition over the meal. In the months following the attack, Aaron withdrew from animal work entirely. She sold her training equipment, moved to Missoula, and refused interviews. Friends said she became quiet, often waking from sleep at the faint sound of metal gates or animal breathing. She never returned to the sanctuary grounds. It was August 19th, 2017, in the Limpopo province of South Africa. The air was heavy from the previous night's storm, the ground damp, the acacia trees still dripping. At Johanboa's game lodge, in the lion enclos, the large male paced in slow, deliberate circles. By mid-morning, tourists had yet to arrive, and Johan decided to tend to the animal himself, a routine he had done hundreds of times before, one that would end differently this time. Johan was 46, a former ranger who had turned his modest patch of bushland into a profitable wildlife lodge. Known for his confidence around big cats, he was comfortable where others were cautious. Over the years, he had cultivated an image of connection between man and predator. His prized attraction was Simba, a 7-year-old male lion raised at the lodge since cubhood. Tourists paid to pose with him through the fence, and sometimes, for higher fees, Johan would lead them into the outer section of the enclos for photographs. He saw it as education and conservation, mixed with business. To staff, Johan was competent but stubborn. He had a habit of trusting his instincts over protocols. Employees described him as meticulous with animal care, yet dismissive of warnings when it came to Simba. The lion was full-grown, nearly 500 pounds, and though raised in captivity, he retained the instincts of a wild predator. Still, Johan insisted Simba recognized him as the one constant presence, often entering the cage to clean or adjust the feeding structure alone. Adult male lions, especially those kept in captivity, exhibit erratic behavior when stressed. Their territorial instincts can surge unpredictably, especially after storms, when senses shift and sound travels differently. A single swipe of a paw can break bone. Their bite, over 650 pounds per square inch, is built to crush windpipes. Even with long-term handlers, moments of agitation can become fatal within seconds. According to pieced-together evidence and reports, Simba had been restless since the thunderstorm. The overnight lightning had sent him pacing and roaring through the night, rubbing his mane against the fence. Caretaker Peter LaRue noticed the behavior early and told Johan that morning to postpone cleaning until the animal calmed down. Johan brushed it off, saying the lion got anxious if ignored. Around 9 a.m., Johan took a broom and bucket toward the enclos while a visiting maintenance worker tested a new camera. There's a video I can't quite shake from my mind. It shows a man named Jan, calmly sweeping near a feeding platform. Then, without much warning, a lion named Simba lunged. The attack was fast, efficient, and final. Jan had approached the gate. Simba had stopped pacing inside. The lion's ears shifted forward, body low to the ground. Jan entered through the inner gate, closing it behind him, but leaving the outer one slightly ajar. He began sweeping, speaking softly as he worked. And another worker filmed, fascinated by Jan's calmness. A few moments passed without issue. Then Simba began circling, his tail flicking sharply. From the video and witness interviews later, Simba's behavior changed rapidly. He lowered his head, crouching, then lunged. The impact knocked Jan forward onto the dirt, the broom clattering away. Simba's jaws clamped around his shoulder, driving him down. Jan yelled and pushed against the lion's muzzle with his free arm, but Simba shifted his grip, teeth sinking into the back of his neck. The sound of deep growling overpowered Jan's cries. Simba dragged Jan several feet toward the shade structure, his claws tearing through the man's shirt and skin. Jan tried rolling onto his back, kicking at the animal's chest, but the lion's weight crushed his ribs. The broom handle snapped as he tried to wedge it between them. Another employee ran toward the gate with a bucket, throwing water over the fence. But it only startled Simba for a second. Jan's voice faltered into short, gurgled gasps. Simba then lunged again, biting into his throat. The motion was efficient and final. The lion's jaws stayed locked as Jan's body went limp. The growls faded into rhythmic breathing. One worker ran to the control hut, slamming the gate alarm that signaled an animal emergency. The other, still holding the camera, didn't move for nearly 30 seconds. Rangers from a nearby property arrived within minutes, tranquilizer rifles ready. They found Simba standing over Jan's body. When the lion turned toward them, shoulders low and tail flicking, they fired 2 darts into his flank. Simba flinched, growled, and backed several steps before collapsing beside Jan. Once Simba was confirmed sedated, the team pulled Jan's body free, using a canvas stretcher, his clothing torn and soaked through with blood. Autopsy revealed crushing trauma to the neck and severe blood loss. Bite movements and tissue analysis confirmed a single sustained attack consistent with defensive predation rather than aggression. The lodge was closed the same week. Simba was euthanized humanely after sedation, and his remains were sent to a veterinary pathology lab in Pretoria for examination. Officials classified the incident as preventable, citing complacency and poor safety protocol. His wife sold the property soon after, and the lion enclosure was sealed for good. That was October 6, 2013. But the story doesn't end there. In Mobile, Alabama, on the edge of the Reeves property, birds moved between the trees. Behind the modest brick house, 2 large cages stood under a tin awning, strong but weathered, their bars streaked with rust. Inside, 2 chimpanzees made sharp and uneven calls. Within the hour, a small routine would turn into something violent and irreversible. Linda Reeves was 58, a retired lab technician who had worked most of her life at a local medical research facility. Her co-workers remembered her as disciplined and precise, with a fascination for animals that bordered on obsession. After retiring early, she poured her savings into building an enclosure for 2 young chimpanzees she had adopted from a private exotic pet dealer. She named them Buddy and Rosie, a male and female she'd raised since infancy. To Linda, they were family. She fed them breakfast cereal, dressed them in children's clothes, and sometimes let them sit in the living room to watch television through the screen door. Her brother, Tom Reeves, visited weekly. He loved her, but worried constantly. The chimps, once under 70 lb, had grown fast. Buddy now weighed over 130, his arms thick and muscular, while Rosie was nearing 100. Chimpanzees are strong beyond proportion, 5 times the upper body strength of an adult man. Males can weigh over 150 lb. Their jaws are capable of shattering bone with a bite force near 1-200 kN per square inch. In the wild, they display bursts of extreme aggression when agitated or competing for dominance, targeting the face, hands, and genitals of their opponents. Captivity often amplifies these instincts, especially when confinement or frustration builds. Tom had seen them rattle the cage doors when upset, and warned Linda repeatedly that they were no longer controllable. It was routine now. Feed, clean, groom, and talk to them like children. But that Sunday morning, the routine would unravel. On that day, Linda carried a plastic bowl filled with banana slices and apples into the enclos. Tom stood by the porch, watching her through the screen. Buddy screeched as she entered, bouncing on his knuckles while Rosie clung to the bars. Linda told them to sit, setting the fruit on a flat rock. Buddy reached before she gave the signal, grabbing her wrist. She pulled back, scolding him sharply. The sound he made next, a deep, chesty pan hoot, was different from his usual play noise. Tom saw the shift immediately. Buddy lunged, knocking Linda backward onto the concrete. The fruit scattered. Rosie screamed, leaping down from the bars. Linda's voice rose in short, panicked bursts as Buddy pinned her by the chest, one hand on her shoulder, the other tearing at her hair. Tom dropped his mug and froze for a second before fumbling for his phone to dial 911. Buddy's hands were red, gripping a handful of Linda's scalp. The screams turned ragged as Buddy's teeth closed around her face. He bit through her cheek. Rosie joined, latching onto Linda's arm. Tom ran to the fence, striking it with a shovel while shouting into the phone for help. Buddy's head jerked up, eyes wide and black, before he went back to tearing. The fence rattled under the blows, but neither chimp reacted for long. I find myself haunted by the image of a patch of concrete, stained faintly dark even after it was scrubbed. The last trace of something terrible that a hose couldn't wash away. It was April 17th, 2015, a bright, warm afternoon just outside Chicago, Illinois. School buses were pulling into the parking lot of a small private animal park. A roadside zoo, really, with fading paint and rust eating away at its old fences. Families and school groups milled about, the air filled with the sounds of children pointing at parrots, goats, and monkeys in their cramped pens. Near the middle of the park, behind a low chain-link railing and a moat thick with algae, was the chimpanzee exhibit. A hand-painted sign warned visitors not to climb or lean on the fence. Inside, 2 adult males and a younger female lived among worn climbing structures. The whole enclosure felt outdated, a far cry from the modern habitats I've seen in larger, accredited zoos. A 12-year-old boy named Matthew Collins was there that day, on a spring field trip. He loved animals and never missed a chance to see them up close. He had a second-hand digital camera and a plan to get the best photos of the chimps. As the group gathered near the enclos, Matthew, wanting a better angle, stepped onto the lower rail for balance. The railing was slick, and as he leaned forward, his foot slipped. He dropped into the pit below. For a moment, there was silence, broken only by the soft panting of the chimps. Then, one of the males, Bo, bristled with tension and started toward the boy. The younger male followed. Visitors later described the sounds as chilling, deep hoots that rose in pitch, the rhythmic drumming of palms on the ground. Bo grabbed Matthew's shirt, and then came the first strike, a sharp blow to the head, then the bite. The smaller male joined in, pulling and striking. A zookeeper ran toward the enclos, spraying the chimps with a hose, breaking their focus for only seconds at a time. The chimps alternated between lunging and retreating as keepers threw fruit and banged metal poles against the barrier. Eventually, Bo released his grip on Matthew's torn shirt. I've spent years studying the line between humans and animals, and sometimes that line blurs in the most tragic ways. There are moments when the familiar turns shockingly violent, when the wildness we think we've tamed resurfaces with devastating force. I remember reading about a case that unfolded on a seemingly ordinary afternoon in Stamford, Connecticut, a story that still haunts me. It was June 11th, 2014. The day was quiet, the kind where the only sounds are lawn mowers and cars drifting through the neighborhood. Houses stood in neat rows along Rockledge Drive, each with its trimmed lawn and small front porch. But inside one of these homes, a woman was about to face an attack that would shock the entire community. The house looked ordinary enough from the outside, but what lived inside made it different from every other home on the block. Belinda Holmes was 57 years old and had lived in Stamford most of her life. She worked part-time at an insurance office, but she was better known to neighbours for keeping an unusual companion. She owned a male chimpanzee named Charlie. Belinda had gotten Charlie as an infant years earlier, ignoring state laws that banned private ownership of such animals. She raised him like a child, dressing him in clothes, feeding him at the table, and driving him around in her car. Friends said she was devoted to him, and believed she could control him the way others controlled pets. For years, Charlie was a local spectacle. Children stared when he looked out the windows. Neighbours watched Belinda walk him on a leash through the yard. She treated him like family and defended him whenever anyone expressed concern. But there were warning signs. Charlie had grown much larger over the years. By age 12, he weighed over 120 lbs. Belinda struggled to hold him back when he became upset, but she insisted he was gentle and misunderstood. The house showed years of living with the animal. Furniture was scratched and damaged from his climbing. The air often smelled of animal musk. Charlie moved freely through the rooms, from the kitchen to the living room to the small backyard. On this June day, the weather was warm and the windows were open. Charlie grew restless, pacing and making noise, as Belinda tried to calm him with fruit and snacks. Years of living in a human household had not removed Charlie's natural instincts. When stressed or frustrated, a chimpanzee's aggressions can surface suddenly with violence that no amount of familiarity can prevent. There had been warnings before. Months earlier, a neighbour called animal control after Charlie escaped into the yard. He chased cars and pounded on a vehicle before Belinda brought him back inside. State officials reminded her that owning him was illegal, but she ignored the fines. Friends noticed that Charlie became irritable around strangers, but Belinda continued to insist he was harmless. On the afternoon of June 11th, his agitation was clear. He banged on the table, knocked over a chair, and showed his teeth. Belinda moved closer to grab his arm. The attack started in seconds. Charlie lunged forward and slammed Belinda backward into the couch. His hands gripped her shoulders, and his teeth sank into her face with terrible force. Neighbours heard the noise through the open windows. Furniture crashed, and Belinda screamed. Charlie bit again, tearing into her hands as she tried to protect herself. Blood pooled quickly across the carpet as he continued the assault with relentless strength. Belinda tried to crawl away, but Charlie dragged her back by her clothes. He hit her with his fists, then bit into her forearm and broke the bone. Her screams brought neighbours running to the house. One man tried the door, but stopped when he looked through the window. Charlie was hunched over Belinda, his face and arms covered in blood. The neighbours backed away and called 911, their voices shaking as they described what was happening. Police arrived within minutes. Officers walking toward the front door heard the chimp screeching and Belinda crying. Through the glass, they saw Charlie attacking, tearing at her scalp and face. There were no cages, no barriers, no way to separate the animal from the victim. When Charlie turned toward the window and pounded against it with bloodied hands, officers decided they had to act. Officers fired multiple shots, the sound echoing through the quiet street. Charlie collapsed in the living room on the blood-stained carpet. Officers rushed inside and pulled Belinda out from under his body. She was barely awake, her face destroyed and her hands mangled. Paramedics worked quickly, but the damage was severe. She was airlifted to a trauma centre with critical facial injuries, severe trauma to both hands, requiring amputation, and massive blood loss. Afterward, investigators documented the scene. Furniture was flipped over, walls were splattered with blood, and Charlie lay where he had fallen. Belinda's phone was found on the kitchen counter, smeared with blood. The last call she tried to make to 911 was never completed. Neighbours gathered outside. I still remember reading about Belinda, the woman whose life was forever altered. The screams, they said, would stay with witnesses forever. It's a chilling reminder of the unpredictable nature of exotic animals. Now, another scene comes to mind, years later, on May 28, 2017. It was Memorial Day weekend near the Colorado River outside of Austin, Texas. Families gathered for a barbecue, a seemingly ordinary afternoon on a quiet patch of grass. But one guest brought an animal that should have only been seen behind glass. The victim was Daniel Ortiz, a 36-year-old high school track coach. He was known for his kindness, always prepared, always thoughtful. He'd just finished a run and stopped by the barbecue after a friend's invitation. He was comfortable around animals, volunteering at a shelter, helping anxious dogs. He kept his distance, respectful, watching the chimpanzee in its harness. The owner was showing it off, handing out fruit. Daniel, wanting to capture the strange scene for his students, moved closer, phone in hand. But adult male chimpanzees, no matter how accustomed to humans, retain their instincts. Crowds, unfamiliar faces, food, these can trigger a sudden, violent response. The picnic site was just outside city limits, beyond the ban on exotic animals, and the handler lacked the proper permits. Some guests were already uneasy. A couple stepped back when the chimp bared its teeth at a toddler. Daniel adjusted his stance, waiting for a clear shot. The tension was building. Children were pulled back. The chimp snatched a strawberry, its eyes fixed on the moving hands. Daniel stepped forward, just a couple of feet, to avoid someone's shoulder in the frame. In a blur, the chimp lunged. The harness yanked tight, but not before its hand closed on Daniel's wrist. His phone went flying. The first bite tore into his forearm. Screams erupted as Daniel stumbled, trying to pull free. The chimp dragged him down, pinning him. It climbed onto his torso, hammering his shoulder with its fists. The leash tangled, slackened. The chimp bit into Daniel's cheek. Blood stained the grass. Attempts to intervene failed. A man who kicked at the chimp was knocked off balance. Another tried to use a folding chair, but the chimp dodged and bit Daniel again. The sounds were awful. Wet impacts, ragged breathing, shrieks from the animal, grunts from Daniel with each bite. The attack only slowed when the owner managed to loop the leash around a picnic table leg. The chimp released, then lunged again, tearing at Daniel's face and arms before finally weakening. Daniel's movements faded. A final bite broke a bone in his wrist. Bystanders threw bottles, tried to shield him with a trash can lid, but it was no use. Emergency calls went out, but the rural location meant help was delayed. When deputies finally arrived, the shouting had stopped. The chimp sat trembling near the overturned table. Daniel lay motionless on the trampled grass. By dusk, only tire tracks and torn paper plates remained. The river kept flowing, carrying away the echoes of that day. I've always been drawn to the moments when the wild and the domestic collide, often with devastating consequences. September 14th, 2018, in Los Angeles is a day that haunts me. I remember reading the initial reports. They stayed with me for weeks. A seemingly simple animal demonstration for a daytime talk show turned into a nightmare. A stark reminder of the unpredictable power held within even the most trained creatures. The small independent production studio was buzzing with activity that morning, the sun cutting across the set. It was just supposed to be a simple segment, a local affiliate filming a chimp doing tricks. Kevin Harris, an experienced exotic animal trainer, had been working with animals for 2 decades. He'd built his career on patience, teaching wild species to tolerate human environments. This TV appearance was just another job. Mike, the 13-year-old chimpanzee, had been with Kevin since he was a baby. At 125 pounds, Mike was strong and intelligent. But as anyone familiar with chimps knows, adulthood changes everything. Dominance instincts sharpen, and what was once tolerated can become a source of volatility. The set was modest, just a sofa, coffee table, and backdrop under hot studio lamps. Mike, wearing only a light collar and leash, sat beside Kevin, shifting and tugging at the strap. Even before the cameras rolled, the animal safety coordinator suggested delaying the segment. Mike was showing signs of stress, pacing, baring teeth, tugging sharply. But the director insisted they proceed. The schedule was tight. Kevin re-asked everyone, offering Mike banana to calm him. For a few seconds, as recording began, it seemed to work. The host smiled, reading her lines. Kevin guided Mike closer, cueing him to wave. Then the boom microphone dipped, casting a shadow across Mike's face. Everything changed instantly. His posture shifted, shoulders hunched, lips curled. A low pant hoot echoed. Kevin turned, voice low, reaching out. The chimp lunged. The leash snapped. Kevin fell backward. Mike's hands came down in rapid strikes, fists hammering Kevin's chest. The room erupted in chaos. The attack was brutal. Mike's jaws locked onto Kevin's arm, tearing through muscle and tendons. Blood sprayed. The chimp released and struck again and again. Crew members screamed. Someone swung a tripod. The chimp's shrieks grew higher, rhythmic and mechanical, each sound matched to a strike or bite. A fire extinguisher finally stopped the attack, but the damage was done. Kevin survived, but barely. Dozens of puncture wounds, a shattered forearm, severe facial injuries. He lost part of his arm and most of the muscle tissue on one side of his face. The production shut down. The footage was never aired. In the aftermath, investigators cited lapses in protocol and disregard for the safety consultant's warning. For Kevin, the lesson came at an unbearable cost. Then, my mind jumps ahead to October 9th, 2019, along the Kampala-Fortale Highway in western Uganda. Another story, another collision between humans and the wild. I've always been drawn to the stories where the line between observer and observed blurs, sometimes with tragic consequences. There's a certain risk, I think, in pursuing the unique image, in pushing just a little too close to the wild. The story of Martin, the photographer in Kibale National Park, is a stark reminder of that risk. He wanted to capture chimpanzees against the backdrop of the mountain road, a striking image, no doubt. Martin had photographed gorillas and monkeys before, so he wasn't inexperienced. But his drive, that hunger for something unique, led him to park near a bend in the road. He slung his camera over his shoulder and started walking along the shoulder. Someone on a passing motorbike shouted something at him, gesturing towards the trees. But Martin just waved back, more concerned with the speeding trucks around those blind corners than with any possible danger from the animals. The highway there cuts sharply through the green ridges, vegetation pressing close on both sides. Red dirt slopes rose up, vines hanging down. Trees leaned over a drop into the dense undergrowth. It was along these edges, these margins, that the chimpanzees sometimes appeared. They could easily climb across the embankments or descend into the ditches lining the road. I read that in their shrinking habitat, the very edge of the asphalt had become just another boundary they patrolled. And when startled, when challenged, their first response was aggression. Rangers at the visitor centre often warned tourists to stay inside their vehicles when driving those forest roads. Truck drivers had even reported seeing chimps near the bends, where fruit trees grew close to the highway. Locals avoided walking alone there, especially in the morning when the animals were most active. Martin had been told all of this the night before at his lodge, but he dismissed it, reasoning that he had worked safely around gorillas, even under stricter conditions. Only a few minutes into his walk, he saw movement on the slope above him. A large male chimpanzee emerged from the vines, pausing at the edge. Behind him, two smaller chimps lingered in the plants. Martin raised his camera, crouching low for a clear angle. Then a truck roared past, startling the animals. The two younger chimps retreated, disappearing back into the cover of the plants. But the male stood his ground, hooting sharply. Martin kept clicking, zooming in for a close shot. He even stepped forward, out into the lane, unaware that the chimp had already begun to climb down toward him. It only took seconds. The chimp dropped onto the asphalt with a heavy thud, closing the gap on all fours. Martin lowered his camera just as the animal charged, dark arms swinging with sudden speed. The first impact knocked him backward into the gravel, his camera skidding across the pavement. The chimp seized his left arm and began dragging him toward the edge of the road. Martin tried to brace himself, tried to dig in his feet, but the strength difference was overwhelming. The first bite clamped onto his forearm, tearing skin and muscle. A passing motorbike braked, the rider shouting as he watched in horror. Martin screamed and kicked, but the chimp straddled his chest and struck his head with its fists. Another bite tore into his shoulder. Blood pooled quickly on the gravel, running into the ditch. The younger chimps appeared briefly from the tree line, hooting and circling, before retreating again. The male remained fixed on Martin, pulling at his clothes, biting again, this time at his ear and jaw. Witnesses tried to intervene. The motorbike rider threw stones from the roadside, but the chimp barely flinched. A truck slowed, horn blaring, startling the animal just long enough for Martin to roll weakly onto his side. But the chimp dragged him back and sank its teeth into his thigh, shaking violently. The sounds, I read, were raw. The rasp of Martin's strained breathing, the chimp's screeches, the crunch of gravel as the struggle shifted back and forth. The assault lasted only a few minutes, though to the witnesses it must have felt far longer, before another vehicle stopped and locals rushed forward, shouting and waving sticks. The chimp finally released him and retreated toward the slope, disappearing into the vines with blood on its face and hands. Martin lay motionless on the roadside, his clothes torn and soaked. Drivers flagged down a passing truck, and Martin was lifted onto the flatbed using a blanket. With no ambulance nearby, the locals tried to keep press on his wounds. As the truck sped toward Fort Portal, he lost consciousness within minutes. By the time they reached the outskirts of town, he had no pulse. Doctors at the hospital confirmed he was dead on arrival. His camera bag, I understand, held memory cards with his last images. The forest edge, the red dirt slope, and one blurred frame of the chimp stepping from the vines.